I want to tell you about the moment Celestine looked me in the eye and said what she said. But if I start there, you won't understand why it hit me the way it did. You won't understand what 7 years of swallowing your pride actually does to a woman until you hear where it all began. And it began the way most painful things do, with me trying too hard and her making sure I paid for it. Obinna and I had been married less than a year when I volunteered to host Easter for his family. I genuinely wanted to. I was still in that season of marriage where you believe love is enough, where you think, if I just show up with my whole heart, people will eventually meet me there. So I cooked for 2 days straight, jollof rice the slow way, the way my mother taught me. A glazed ham, macaroni and cheese from scratch. A peach cobbler. I had practiced 3 times before I got it right. I pressed the tablecloth the night before. I bought fresh orange flowers for the center of the table. I wanted Celestine to see that I was good enough for her son. That was my first mistake. Celestine arrived 40 minutes late. She handed me a store-bought pie without looking at me, walked straight to Obinna and started a conversation I was not part of. I told myself it was fine. The food was eaten. The table was warm. And when she kissed my cheek on the way out that evening and said, "It was fine, dear," I nearly exhaled for the first time in 2 days. Not from joy, from relief. And there is a difference, a painful, humiliating difference that nobody warns you about. It was fine, dear. 3 words. I held on to them like they were a compliment. That is how little she had given me, and how desperately I was reaching for anything. The next morning, Obinna's aunt called. Not Celestine, not Obinna. His aunt, the one who always looked at me with something soft and sorry in her eyes. She told me gently, "The way you tell someone news you know is going to leave a mark." Celestine had called the whole family the night before. The same night she kissed my cheek. She invited everyone to her house the next day for what she was calling the real Easter dinner. Turkey. A proper spread, because, as she told each person individually, nobody had truly been satisfied with what was served at my table. I had cooked for 2 days, practiced that cobbler 3 times, pressed that tablecloth. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that call ended. I did not cry. I did not call Celestine. I didn't even bring it up with Obinna that night, because I already knew, without testing it, that he would find a gentle way to explain his mother, and I was not strong enough to watch him do that to me. So I went quiet. And I stayed quiet. After that, I stopped cooking at family gatherings. No announcement, no scene. I simply stopped being the woman who showed up with a dish. Nobody asked why. And that silence, that complete, unbothered silence from every single person in that family, told me more than anything Celestine had ever said out loud. But I kept coming. Every Easter, every holiday, every long Sunday dinner where the conversation moved around me like I was furniture. I kept coming because Obinna was my husband, and I loved him. And because there is a kind of stubborn, foolish hope that lives inside women like me, the kind that keeps whispering, maybe next time she will finally see me. 7 years, 7 Easters, I kept showing up. And then came the Easter where Obinna decided to smoke ribs. And everything I had quietly carried for 7 years finally had somewhere to land. Not because of the ribs. Because of what Celestine said when she looked at what I cooked and decided, once again, that I was not worth basic human decency. Every year, without fail, the first sign that Easter was going to be difficult was not something anyone said to my face. It was a text message, sent to Obinna, about me. About what I had or hadn't done, what we were or weren't serving, what Celestine had already decided she would not eat before she had even been invited to sit down. This year was no different. Except this year, it started earlier than usual. Obinna had decided to smoke ribs. He had been planning it for weeks. It wasn't a random choice. Smoking ribs is a 6-hour commitment. You don't just wake up one morning and decide to do it. He had bought the meat, prepped the dry rub, mapped out the timing. He was genuinely excited, and for one small moment, I let myself be excited too. Because when Obinna is happy in the kitchen, the whole house feels lighter, and I had not felt that lightness in a long time. Then his phone lit up. Uchenna texted first. She didn't want smoked ribs. Could Obinna make hers a different way? Obinna read it out loud and looked at me with that expression I had learned to recognize over 7 years. The one that is half apology, half exhaustion. I said nothing. Then Celestine's message came through, and her ask was not a question. It was a statement dressed as a request. Chicken, please. You know I don't eat ribs. Just like that. No greeting. No. How are you? No acknowledgement that her son had been planning this for weeks. Just, chicken, please. As if we were a restaurant. As if our home, our time, our effort was a menu she could order from. Obinna stared at his phone for a moment, then looked up at me and said, I don't even know why I bother. And I thought, I have been thinking that for 7 years. Welcome. He almost scrapped the whole thing. I watched him stand in our kitchen, weighing whether any of this was worth it. And I understood that feeling more than he knew. But there were 8 other people coming who actually wanted ribs. 8 people who had said nothing but yes. So he made a decision. He texted Celestine and Uchenna and told them plainly, bring your own meat. He would not be changing the menu. Celestine's response came within minutes. For real? I thought you were accommodating everyone. A jab dressed in confusion. Because that is how she operated, every dig wrapped in something that sounded almost reasonable if you read it fast enough. We didn't host at our house that year. Obinna's grandfather, a quiet man named Papa Emeka, was 86 years old and on oxygen. Getting him out anywhere had become its own ordeal. So we moved the gathering to his house. It was the right thing to do. The obvious thing. Celestine, of course, found a way to make that into something else entirely. But we let it go. Some battles, you have to choose. My contribution that day was simple. Obinna handled the ribs, the salad, the potatoes. I made 3 side dishes. Cornbread, baked beans with a little onion and barbecue sauce stirred in, and a small corn dish I threw together because it paired well. Nothing fancy. The beans especially were the most effortless thing I had made in years. I didn't think twice about them. I plated them, set them on the table, and moved on. I had no idea those beans were about to become the center of everything. We arrived. The house filled slowly. People found their seats. Obinna ended up in the living room with Papa Emeka and the children, which meant I was at the dinner table without him, surrounded by his family. And Celestine, sitting close enough that I could feel every word before she even opened her mouth. I want you to picture the table. Because the seating matters more than you'd think. To my left sat Obinna's grandmother, Mama Ada, a small woman with big hands and warm eyes who had never once made me feel unwelcome in her home. Beside her was Uchenna, and next to Uchenna, her 6-month-old daughter sleeping in a carrier. To my right sat Obinna's father, a quiet man who chose his words carefully and his battles even more so. Then Celestine. Then Jerome, Uchenna's fiancé, a man I had only met a handful of times. A man who, until that afternoon, had never witnessed what life in this family actually looked like for me. And Obinna was in the living room, with Papa Emeka and our children. Close enough that I could hear his voice through the wall, far enough that I was completely alone at that table. That is the thing nobody talks about. Celestine was always braver, always sharper, always more willing to say what she really thought, when Obinna was not in the room. 7 years had taught me that. She knew exactly where she could push and where she had to hold back, and right now, there was nothing holding her back. The food was on the table. Obinna's ribs were at the center, slow and smoky and everything he had worked 6 hours for. My cornbread sat in a basket lined with a cloth. The beans were in a simple white dish, nothing special about them, just beans. A can, some onion, a spoon of barbecue sauce, a little heat. Something I had thrown together because I loved dipping cornbread into warm beans and it felt like comfort food on a day that already felt heavy. Celestine had brought her own chicken. She took that. She took some salad. And then, she looked at the beans, reached over slowly, spooned a small amount onto her plate, the way a person does when they have already decided something but want to confirm it. She took one bite. Then she looked up at me and said, "What's in these?" I told her. "Onion. Barbecue sauce. Simple." She set her fork down. And then she said it. "These are disgusting." Just like that. No hesitation, no softening, no glance around the table to read the room. Just those 3 words, dropped in the middle of a holiday dinner, in front of everyone, like she was commenting on the weather. I felt my face go hot. I know it did because I could feel every person at that table notice it. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Obinna's father cleared his throat quietly and said, "Everyone's palate is different." Mama Ada looked at me with soft, steady eyes and said, "You can't please everyone, baby. Don't even bother trying." Small mercies. I grabbed onto both of them. I thought that was it. I thought the worst had passed. I was wrong. Because Celestine was not finished. She looked down at the beans still sitting on her plate. And then she said, almost casually, almost like an afterthought, "Well, the garbage will enjoy them." The table went completely silent. I felt something leave my body in that moment. Not anger, not sadness exactly. Something quieter than both. The feeling of a woman who has spent 7 years being patient, being gracious, being the bigger person, and realizing in one single sentence that none of it had ever mattered. Not one day of it. I did not cry. I will tell you that right now. I held my face together the way you learn to do when you have been holding things together for years. But my hands, under the table, were pressed flat against my thighs. Pressing down. Staying steady. And then, from the other side of the table, came a voice I did not expect. Jerome was not someone I knew well. He was Uchenna's fiancé, a man who had shown up into this family recently enough that nobody had thought to warn him yet. He still smiled easily at family gatherings, still asked genuine questions, still had that look in his eyes that people carry before they understand what they have walked into. He had never seen Celestine do what she did to me, not once, until today. After those words left Celestine's mouth, "The garbage will enjoy them," Jerome put his fork down slowly. I noticed because everything at that table had gone so still that even small movements felt loud. He looked at Celestine, not with anger exactly, with something more unsettling than anger. The look of a person trying to confirm that what they just heard was real. "Pardon me?" 2 words. Quiet. Steady. But they landed on that table like something heavy dropped from a height. Celestine did not respond. She looked down at her plate. And the silence that followed was unlike any silence I had ever sat in at that table. Because this time, it was not the silence of people looking away to protect themselves. It was the silence of people caught. Of people who had watched this happen for years and never once said a word, now sitting across from a man who had seen it for the first time and could not let it pass. Jerome turned to me then, and the look on his face, I have thought about it many times since that day. It was not pity. I have had enough of pity from people in that family to last a lifetime. It was something cleaner than that. It was the look of someone who sees you, actually sees you, and is quietly horrified that everyone else at that table had apparently stopped seeing you a long time ago. He didn't say another word after that. He didn't need to. Those 2 words had already done what 7 years of my silence never could. Mama Ada, Obina's grandmother, looked at me from across the table with warm, deliberate eyes. She reached over and spooned herself a second helping of my beans. Then she ate them slowly, every last one, like a quiet act of loyalty. Like a woman who had lived long enough to know that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is finish your plate. I held myself together through the rest of that dinner. I passed dishes. I answered questions. I smiled when smiling was required. But something had shifted inside me in a way I could not explain and did not yet have words for. Something that had been bending for 7 years had finally decided it was done bending. I just didn't know yet what that meant. Not until the drive home. We drove home in the kind of quiet that is not empty. It is full. Full of everything that happened and everything that hadn't been said yet. Our children were in the back seat. I watched the streetlights pass and I kept my hands folded in my lap and I did not cry. Even though something inside my chest was pressing hard against my ribs the whole ride. Once the children were in bed, I told Obina everything. I did not dramatize it. I did not perform it. I sat across from him at the kitchen table and I told him exactly what happened. Exactly what his mother said. Exactly how the table went silent, and exactly how it felt to sit there and hold myself together while everyone around me either looked away or said nothing. I watched his face as I spoke. And I want to tell you something about Obina, because this matters. He is not a man who jumps quickly. He listens first. He sits with things. Sometimes that has frustrated me over the years, but that night, I was grateful for it. Because when he finally spoke, I knew he had actually heard me. He didn't say, "She didn't mean it." He didn't say, "You know how she is." He didn't reach for a single excuse, and I had been bracing for all of them without even realizing it. Instead, he looked at me, and he said, "We are done going to these things for a while. Both of us. Done." Just like that. I nodded. And something that had been wound tight inside me for 7 years quietly loosened. He didn't fix everything that night, 7 years of small wounds don't disappear over one kitchen table conversation. But for the first time, I felt like he was standing on the same side of the room as me. And that was everything. I have thought a lot about that Easter since then. Not about the beans. The beans were never really the point. I have thought about what it means to keep showing up for people who have decided, long before you walk through the door, that you will never quite belong. I have thought about the 7 years I spent trying to earn something that was never on the table to begin with, and I have thought about Jerome, a man I barely knew, who put his fork down and said 2 quiet words that did more for me than 7 years of silence from the people who should have spoken long before he did. I have thought about Mama Ada, eating every last bean, slowly, like a woman who wanted to make sure I saw her do it. I stood that day. I didn't shout. I didn't break. I didn't give Celestine the satisfaction of watching me fall apart at her table. I just stood, quietly. The way women like us have always had to stand. And when I walked out of that house, I walked out differently than I had walked in. Something had shifted. Something had been decided. Not with words, not with a confrontation, just, inside me, quietly. Finally, she stood anyway. Before you go, I need to ask you something. And I want you to be honest in the comments because this is the kind of question that does not have one easy answer. Obinna knew his mother his entire life. He had seen hints of who she was long before that Easter dinner. So here is what I want to know. Do you think Obinna did enough? Or do you think a husband who truly sees his wife would have drawn that line long before it ever got to a bowl of beans at a holiday table? Drop your thoughts below. And if you have ever sat at a table where you felt invisible, where you held yourself together when everything in you wanted to break, this comment section is yours too. Because on this channel, every woman's story gets to be heard. And if this story stayed with you, if something Blessing carried felt familiar, you already know you belong here. Subscribe to She Stood Anyway. A new story every week. Because somewhere out there, another woman is still holding it together at someone else's table. And she deserves to know she is not alone.